Hi, how's it going? Hello everyone. There are many reasons why someone might buy an expensive microphone. Maybe you want a particular sound or a certain tone that a particular mic provides. Maybe you appreciate a high quality build or just like the way a certain microphone looks. Maybe you want a particular microphone because, shut up, I just want it. Hey, no judgment here. If you have the money and want a microphone for whatever reason, go for it. There are certainly a lot of great microphones out there. But do you really need an expensive microphone? In some cases, maybe. But for YouTube videos, for streaming, or even for a podcast, I don't think you really have to use a super expensive microphone. Right now I'm recording with an AT2020, which is not exactly a high-end microphone. Don't get me wrong, there are sometimes real, objective benefits to be gained with more expensive microphones. Not to mention the secondary things like an appreciation for a certain look or build quality. But if you're on a tight budget and you have a decent recording space, you might be able to get by with a cheaper microphone than you think. Or maybe I'm talking nonsense. I decided it would be fun to do a blind test with a handful of microphones of wildly different prices to see how obvious the differences are when you don't actually know what microphone you're hearing. If I'm just reading a story and switching between mics with no indication of which mic is which, will the less expensive microphone meaningfully hamper the experience? Let's find out. For the testing, I'll be using all of these microphones on the desk. There is a blue Snowball Ice, a blue Ember, a Rode NT1, an Earthworks SR314, a Tascam TM280, an Audio-Technica AT2020, and a Neumann TLM 103. I'll be recording here in my homemade sound booth, and I'll assign each microphone a letter at random, and I won't reveal which microphone is which until the end. So let's get started. Danny lay awake in his bunk, unable to sleep. The wind was picking up, and the waves breaking against the side of the ship were beginning to send a fine spray through the open window, which was drying on his skin and turning it crusty from the salt. But he didn't even consider closing the window. The breeze and even the occasional salty mist were all that made the stifling heat bearable. It wasn't normally this hot at night, but tonight was a scorcher. Before leaving on this trip, Danny would have thought the rocking of the ship would make it easier to sleep. That notion was quickly dispelled the first night. He barely slept that night. Even though the motion of the ship hadn't been nearly enough to roll him out of bed, his subconscious kept jolting him awake with a sudden feeling that he was falling out of bed, just as he was falling asleep. He understood now why some of the crew slept in hammocks. They stayed level as the ship rocked. The bunk in Danny's room did not. While Danny was surprised to find his subconscious imagining falling out of bed and waking him up, he was also surprised to find that he got used to it after only a couple nights. Now, nearly a week and a half later, he barely noticed the ship rocking. Granted, the rocking was slight most of the time, but they sailed through some rough seas a few nights ago. Once or twice he wondered if he would be rolled out of bed while he slept. But he still fell asleep that night without much trouble. What kept Donnie awake tonight wasn't the rocking of the ship, the occasional sea mist on his face, or even the miserable heat. Tonight his head was filled with the imagined conversations going on between the crew on deck. He couldn't hear them over the waves and the creaking of the ship, but he knew they were up there. There wouldn't be many passengers awake at this hour, and they probably wouldn't be on deck, but there were always some crew on duty. It's not like they would have much to do on a night like tonight. Surely they would be talking. And talking freely with no passengers around. Danny wondered if the crew suspected anything. They couldn't know. Shouldn't even suspect. But still he worried. He was proud of how well he'd played the part of just another tourist, vacationing for a few weeks on the ocean in an old-fashioned pirate ship. Or at least as close as modern tourist would want to get. It looked the part in many respects, but it had private rooms and a well-stocked kitchen that could cook proper meals. No tasteless hardtack and scurvy on this trip. There were also proper toilet and shower facilities, as well as other amenities. Nothing near as fancy as a modern cruise ship, but it was a relatively comfortable trip, all things considered. Though at the moment he imagined most passengers would agree to pay double for air conditioning. But as they neared the island, Danny imagined things going wrong. If the crew did suspect anything, they would be watching for more than just dangers outside the ship. They would be keeping an eye on the passenger who had lied about his name. They couldn't know he lied about his name, lied about everything. Still, he worried. This wasn't an actual pirate ship. They surely had modern communications and could send and receive information. What if they did know, or at least suspected? The fact they hadn't confronted him yet didn't mean anything. They would wait till they arrived to the island to confront him so as not to cause issues at sea. Were they up there discussing that very plan right now? Danny told himself he was being silly. The crew didn't suspect anything, and they didn't send or receive any communication about him. They didn't know his name was not Lars Williams, as it said on his passport and boarding pass. They couldn't know that his plans on the island diverged significantly from the itinerary that the travel agency had set up. And surely they didn't know who was after him. The crew wasn't talking about him. They would be talking about the weather or their families or something like that. It was fine. He was fine. He would make it. He just needed to get some sleep. He had to be sharp tomorrow.
For sure, Donnie. That topic today was fantastic. I'm glad we covered it so thoroughly and thoughtfully.
I know what you mean, Tad. Our comments were definitely on point, well considered and well reasoned. I specifically liked that time when you made that funny comment regarding that pop culture reference.
I know, right? That was the perfect comment about that pop culture reference. Totally clever of me. But you deserve some credit for bringing up that pop culture reference. You totally set me up for that joke.
Oh, yeah. Big shout out to me for bringing that up. I just wish more current events were funny right now.
Totally. It's tough to bring current events into a podcast like ours when there's such a drag.
So there you have it. Could you tell which microphone was which? I'm sure some people will prefer the sound of some over others, and I'm sure some people will be able to pick out the cheaper microphones or even be put off by certain aspects of their performance. But when it comes right down to it, for most people, listening to any of these microphones in isolation, would all of them be good enough? And in isolation, what I just mean is, if I had recorded all of that with any one of these microphones, would it have been good enough? Or did any one of them strike you as simply not good enough? So now that you've listened to them, or now that you've jumped ahead to this point, microphone A was the AT2020, microphone B was the TLM 103, mic C was the Tascam TM280, microphone D was the blue Snowball Ice, microphone E was the NT1, microphone F was the SR314, and microphone G was the blue Ember. Any surprises there? Any obvious ones? There are many different situations and use cases, and this is just a small sample. And obviously this isn't a super technical comparison designed to illustrate the differences. But that's kind of the point. Hopefully it gives you some idea of whether or not you really need to spend more to get good enough audio for your use case. And hopefully that was helpful or interesting. And if you have any questions, let me know. And as always, thanks for watching. Take care.